So, do you hate conflict? Welcome to humanity. Most of us dread being in conflict with a family member or a friend or a colleague or a boss. Now, you might be surprised to learn that what we often see as conflict doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It is true that in some cases, time will magically heal a conflict or a wound. But more often than not, unresolved conflict actually simmers, making things get worse. Today, I'm going to give you some tips on how to first assess whether you should engage, second, when you should engage, and third, how to get started. So, before we dive in, if you're watching this because you're currently avoiding a conflict, do me a favor and drop what that conflict is in the comments and why you're avoiding it. I also want to give you a goal. At the end of this, I want you to commit to assessing whether you're going to really take it on and how you're going to do it. I'm Bob Bordone. I'm a senior fellow at Harvard Law School. I'm the founder and former director of Harvard Law School's Negotiation and Mediation clinical program. I taught negotiation, conflict resolution, mediation, and many other courses at Harvard Law School for more than 2 decades, and I'm a founder and principal of the Cambridge Negotiation Institute. So, by the end of this video, I want you to be able to articulate what the next step will be for you in how to address this conflict. Okay, now that you have this goal, let's start with how do you decide whether to engage at all? So here are a few diagnostic questions I want you to take on. First, make a list of what are the fears you have about engaging the conflict. For example, maybe you're thinking, it won't help, or I'll get hurt, or they'll get hurt, or it'll get worse. Whatever that list is, I want you to write that out. Second, I want you to write out what are the costs of avoiding the conflict. For example, things won't get better. I'll stay hurt. Maybe it'll get worse. Maybe the relationship will end. Whatever you see as the costs, write them out. My guess is that for many of us, when we look at that list of fears of having and costs of avoiding, we actually see both of them are quite high. My experience in working with clients is that they're often avoiding because they're only writing out or thinking in their mind about the fears of having the conversation, and they're not calculating the cost of avoiding the conflict. If you're finding that the costs of avoiding are actually pretty similar to the fears of having, that's a first indicator that maybe you actually need to engage this conflict. Okay, now that you have done that, let me give you a few more important diagnostic questions. First, how important is this relationship to you? Whether it's a work relationship or a personal one or a family one. How would you feel if it ended or got worse or changed? Now, assuming that the relationship matters a bit, and my guess, if you're watching this video, is that it's because the relationship matters a bit. Then I want you to think to yourself, how frequently does either this particular conflict or the pattern involved in this conflict come up? Is it once a year at Thanksgiving? Is it every 6 months? Is it like all the time? Meaning, and this is the next question I want you to ask, how much of your brain space is this conflict and this relationship taking up? Is it keeping you up at night? Is it something you talk to friends and family or a therapist about? The more you're answering yes to these questions, the more you're making your own case that avoiding or pretending it's not there or thinking time will melt it away is actually a really bad strategy. Now, the next question I want you to ask yourself is, do you have any credible reason to believe that delay will actually solve this problem? I can't tell you how many people I work with who will go through all of the diagnosis that we just did, and they'll still say, yeah, but I'm hoping things might get better, or, yeah, I think This won't be a problem down the road. And then I say, I'm so glad to hear that. What makes you think that? And they kind of pause and they look at me. They don't have an answer. Right? If you can't come up with a credible reason why this might actually end, it's simply magical thinking that the conflict is going to disappear. And ultimately, what I want you to avoid is what I call the deathbed conversation. Right? You or they are maybe literally dying, or the relationship is almost dead, and that's when you bring it up. Right? That just leads to a mountain of regret. So, assuming that these diagnostic questions have left you feeling like, I guess I do need to engage this. I do need to have this series of really challenging conversations.
You are right.
Okay, so you've just done this diagnostic work. Now let me ask you, is your gut telling you, in answer to the questions I gave you, that you need to engage this conflict? If any aspect of the answers to these questions is yes, then you need to stay tuned because I'm going to tell you how to prepare to engage this set of difficult conversations. And not surprisingly, it's going to start again with yourself. Doing a personal audit. So what do I mean by this? Well, first, really asking yourself, what's important to you when you think about this relationship? What are your interests with respect to it? Second, what emotions come up for you when you think about engaging this hard conversation? What are your fears and what are your hopes? One of the ways into this conflict is to begin by sharing both your fears and your hopes for entering into this hard conversation in a constructive way. Secondly, I want you to take some time to consider, what does the world look like from their perspective? Why are they in this friendship or relationship or colleagueship? What's important to them? What might they be feeling? What might their fears be? So now that you've done this preparatory work, you don't just want to barrel into this conflict, right? You don't want to just take them off guard. Instead, you need to choose the right time and the right place to have the conversation. So a few things to avoid here. First, don't wait until you're in the midst of some kind of heated fight and then bring it up. Instead, you want to set up the conversation at a time and a place when both of you are actually able to engage and have some preparation. Secondly, you really want to let them in on what you want to talk about. The more mysterious you make it, the more you surprise them, the less likely it's going to go well. So the other thing you want to avoid is what I call the doorknob problem. So this is actually something I learned from some of my friends who are therapists. They talk about having a client come in and spend 50 minutes of their hour together or 55 minutes of the hour together talking about not so much. And then literally as they're leaving the appointment, as they grab the doorknob to leave, they say, "Oh, and by the way, doctor, my mother passed away this week." In other words, what you want to avoid is setting up a time to talk and then being completely avoidant until the last minute. So another way of saying this is don't back in to the hard conversation, but be direct. Talk about your hopes, your fears, your concerns, and then frame it as a shared or joint problem. Last thing I want to say about this is preparation is really important when you decide to engage a really hard conflict. And in fact, working with a colleague or a friend or a coach, someone like me, can help a lot. And no matter how much preparation you do, raising a conflict with a friend or a colleague or someone you care about can't be scripted. And it will not go as planned. And that simply means that it's important to manage your own expectations and to expect mistakes. Usually, having that first hard conversation doesn't solve all the problems, but it sets you up, if done well, to really work on the conflict over the long term. So let me give you an example actually involving someone I worked with just a few months ago. this person came to me really wanting help broadly on how to engage differences. But very quickly we realized that she had someone in her life with whom she had not had a good relationship for many years. And she was absolutely dreading engaging with this person. But we did a lot of work, really working through the diagnostic questions that we talked about and then doing some practice together. And what was amazing is she ultimately had this incredibly powerful conversation with a family member that completely transformed the way she saw the relationship and the way she saw them. And she came back to me and she said, you know, one of the things that I've learned is that my fear of conflict is actually never as bad as actually being in the conflict itself. The biggest thing for me is getting over the anxiety and then just breathing into it and working through it. And I want to end by saying that insight from her is almost universal with the people with whom I work, and frankly, even with myself. That there are times when the thought of the engagement really is actually worse than the engagement. And even if the engagement doesn't end the way I hope, I learn really important information that helps me navigate how to move forward in the relationship if I want to, or gives me the tools that I need to exit in a way that still makes me feeling good about myself. Okay, so if you want some more tools on how to handle these conflicts and difficult conversations better, watch my next video, which is called Influence Mastery, the Art of Persuasion and Relationship Building. And before you leave, make sure you subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, like this video, and ring the bell so you'll keep getting helpful tools like this. Okay, it's not difficult to keep watching. Click, click.